morning, everyone. It's Ian live from Urban Bounty. We're here at the Lansdowne Food Garden. It's a beautiful autumn day, and we're going to harvest some of the vegetables that we're going to put into our noodle soup today. It's autumn, and it's time to sit down and nourish ourselves. We're going to be harvesting some green onions and scallions, some radishes, a little bit of bok choy and basil, and we'll incorporate that all into our noodle soup today. So today we're going to use some chicken, and we're making a broth using all the ingredients that we gathered outside. Really important that you buy the whole piece of chicken. That way you can debone it, use the bones for the stock, and then use the meat for the dish itself. So into this pot, I'm adding all these chicken bones that I've cleaned, and I will just leave these chicken thighs for a little bit later. Into the pot, I will take lemongrass, I'll take the basil, I will take some of the lime leaves and some of the green onions that we gathered outside. So I'll chop all these up and I'll add it into this pot. As it simmers, the flavors are going to get extracted and it's going to mingle with the beautiful flavor of the chicken. The green onions or the scallions don't have to be chopped up very small. We'll just add that in. Lemongrass is an interesting aromatic to use. Basically, you want to use the bottom half of the lemongrass. The top half is a little bit thinner, and I'll just split this into two. Mind your fingers as you do this. And even as I'm cutting it, the aromatic is just perfuming the whole cutting board. So I'll take the lemongrass and I'll use the back of my knife and basically bruise it. And I'll add that into my stock as well. My lime leaves, just take a few of these and just cut them into little strips. That goes into the stock. I have some ginger here. Take a sliver of ginger. I'm going to remove the skin and just use the back of my knife and just scrape it like that. The skin comes off. And I'll just chop that into a few small pieces. Into that, there's also some garlic. Beautiful garlic from the interior. Take that piece of garlic, just trim it off. And just like my grandmother does, give it a whack. The skin peels off. And you're left with this whole clove of garlic. I'll add it into the stock. So with everything in here, we're starting to add the flavors together. We're going to simmer it. We're not going to boil it. And we'll simmer this probably for about half an hour. That way all the flavors will come out and you'll get this beautiful, rich, flavorful broth to use for your noodles. Now that the broth is on the go, we want to take the chicken and debone it. So I purchased thighs, and these are great because they're really meaty. First, I remove all the skin because we are being a little bit more mindful with our fat intake. And the skin, we don't need to use it. But if you really love chicken skin, you could use this and deep fry it and make crackling. So we're just going to tear that off. Trim off any excess fat around the chicken thigh. And I just like to use a small paring knife. I'll just peel that away and take off the fat. And then I'll turn my chicken thighs over and we'll expose the bone over here. I'll just take my knife and slide it along the side, turn it around, expose the other side of the bone, and then I pinch the bone and I push my knife through it and I cut out. And I scrape the rest of the meat. And I have the bone from the thigh, which I'll add into the stock. So I'll do that again. I'll take the chicken thigh, I'll cut along the bone to expose it on the one side. I'll turn it around, remove that from the other side of the bone, pinch, put my knife through it, cut out, scrape down away from my fingers so I don't cut myself, and then the bone with a little bit of meat is fine, and it goes into the stock. Now these 2 pieces of chicken thigh, I'll end up poaching into the final broth that we use for the dish. We're just looking at the stock right now, and you can see on the surface there's some impurities that are coming to the surface. That's very common, and we'll probably skim that with a ladle later on. So have a ladle, and we're just going to remove that. Those will probably make our broth a lot clearer. And again, we're simmering this, we're not boiling. So the temperature is probably around this, the agitation. If this is happening, your heat is too high, and what will happen is that your impurities will emulsify into your broth, and you won't get a broth that is clear. So as this simmers, I'm just going to keep an eye on it. I will be preparing some of the vegetables that we need. We harvested and gathered these beautiful turnips. I'm just going to take them and split them into quarters. I'm not even going to peel them. These are so sweet. They will add a nice texture to the dish. And we are making a beautiful noodle broth with autumn vegetables. So we have some turnips, we have some mushrooms that we'll just slice. If you prefer to use the shiitake mushrooms, it'll add a different flavor to it. I just find with a dish like this, I want the flavor of those South Asian vegetables to come out, and the shiitake mushrooms tend to overpower it. So I'm going to leave the broth to be something that is quite light. We have the turnips, we have the mushrooms, we take some carrots. Trim these off. And I'll just slice them into quarters. Again, they're washed and unpeeled. All right. And we have the beautiful bok choy that we gathered as well. We'll take these and we'll just slice them into strips. So these are the vegetables that we'll be putting into our broth. And we've got the chicken breast ready to go. The noodles we're using is a broad bean thread. I pre-cooked some, and they look like this. They're white, they're kind of chewy, and they're rubbery. They will hold really well in a noodle broth because they are very neutral in flavor, and it adds a nice chewy texture to the dish. Just noticing what's happening on my broth. The liquid is starting to come up and starting to simmer. I can see little bubbles here. I'm going to turn the heat down and take my ladle and remove some of the impurities that are floating on the surface. And I'll just dispose of that. While the broth is simmering away, we want to make sure we have the garnish. So we are going to take some of the green onions and the basil. This will go on top of the dish. So these ingredients are for going into the dish, and these are the garnish. The green onions I like to slice really on a long bias and as thin as possible. And the basil, we'll pick out the best pieces. Any trim, we'll just add it into the stock. So the basil that we gathered is beautiful. They're like little pieces of microgreens. I'm not even going to chop this or dice it up because it'll show very nicely as it is. The stock has simmered roughly for half an hour. I'm going to do a last skim on it, and we will separate the solids from the beautiful broth that we've created. So you can see here we've got a lot of the fat and a lot of the impurities. That will just make our dish less appealing. Here we are. And we will just take the stock And slowly pour it into this pot, separate the solids. We're ready to finish off this dish. We are taking the stock that we've strained out, putting it into a separate pot. And into this pot, we'll take the chicken that we deboned, and we'll just let it sit in there for about 5 minutes. When the chicken is nice and juicy and still tender, we'll add the other vegetables, and then we'll finish this dish. As you can see, the chicken, as it poaches, will also release impurities. It's been about 5 minutes. I will skim off the impurities that came off of the chicken thigh. And into this, I will add my vegetables. I'll add my carrots, my mushrooms, my turnips, and I'll wait a few minutes before I add my bok choy. I want to make sure that the bok choy is still nice and crispy, so it's slightly wilted. I find that a lot of people overcook bok choy and it becomes too soft. So this dish, the mushrooms are super silky, the carrots and the turnips have a nice crunch to it, and the bok choy will also have a nice crunch to it. It'll be finished off with these bean thread noodles, and I'll just wait for all these vegetables to cook for a few minutes, and then I'll finish the dish. The veggies have been in here for about 3 minutes. I will add my bok choy into here, and the pre-cooked noodles. So just one portion. This was 2 portions. Just pop that in. I'll just let that warm up, and then we will finish it off into this dish. You have a choice when you finish the dish. You could add some spice into it. You could add some sesame oil. You could add some soy sauce if there isn't enough salt in it. I've salted this a little bit, and all the flavors of those aromatic vegetables have perfumed this whole dish. I've chosen to use broad bean noodles. You could use whatever noodles you choose. You could use wheat noodles, you could use buckwheat noodles, you could use pasta if you had to. So a noodle dish comes from every single culture. I chose to use these noodles because of the texture. It's nice and rubbery. Okay, everything is ready and we are ready to plate. I'll turn the heat off. What I'll do with my chicken thigh is find it and just leave it on my cutting board. I want to slice it and put it on top of the dish. We have the noodles. Now these beautiful vegetables that will help to give a lot of color. Take the chicken, we'll just slice it so then it's easier to eat. On top of the dish, add our stock. And finish off with our green onions, scallions, and our fresh basil. I will choose to just drizzle it with a little bit of sesame oil. This noodle dish is perfect for fall as we move into colder weather. It is very heartwarming. It will make the home smell amazing. And we just want to say thank you to everyone who's participated in this project. It is an essential piece of sustainable agriculture. It ties in with the land that we work on, the Hunkaminam people, which lands we have been using. And as we move forward into the future, we want to make sure that you stay connected with us because perhaps next year we'll have another installment of the cooking series. Just a reminder that the recipes and the previous videos can be found at lansdowne-centre.com.